Florida Governor Ron DeSantis just signed a controversial new bill into law Monday that allows the state to impose penalties on social media platforms up to $250,000 a day if they ban political candidates. DeSantis was asked about the motives behind the bill. Here's what he had to say.
Governor, hi. I want to ask you about the bill that you're signing here today. You're a loyal supporter of former President Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump is now a resident in Florida, and he was deplatformed. Is this bill for him?
The bill is for everyday Floridians, this is what we said, and it will allow any Floridian to be able to provide what they're doing. So, but I do think that's another issue that has been brought to bear. When you deplatform the President of the United States, but you let Ayatollah Khomeini talk about killing Jews, that is wrong.
We need to have a conversation with the governor about his audio, but that's a whole other discussion. Democratic strategist and owner of JC Strategies, Jennifer Holdsworth-Karp, and Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard. They join us now to discuss. Rachel, you've thought a lot about tech and policy on the right. What do you make of Governor DeSantis' bill? The controversy I've seen around it is that there's a large carve-out for Disney, I believe. Got to bow down before Disney in the state of Florida, but just on a broader conceptual level.
I think it's the beginning of what you're going to see as an iterative effort from the states. And what I like about it is that it's beginning to distinguish what these platforms are, because we've talked a lot about them as speech platforms. But what they really are is the biggest digital advertising agencies in the world. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, there's a very strong political speech component to what these platforms do. And that gets to the heart of what DeSantis is trying to do when he says, look, if you block or ban political candidates who are trying to reach voters, you're giving someone an advantage, a political opponent an advantage over somebody else. You can't do that. And, members at the federal level have talked about this in context of an FEC violation, but of course haven't done a single thing. So I think DeSantis is really picking up the mantle and saying, look, there's a huge political speech and fairness component to these platforms. I'm going to address that. And then furthermore, I'm going to force more transparency into what these platforms do by allowing individual users to have claims against them if they're removed. So I think two key issues that really, people talk about, but he's the first person, I think, to actually take a swing at addressing them. And he deserves some credit for that.
Jen, let's stipulate that, look, first of all, this is a show bill. It's garnering him a lot of support within the Republican base. And there's, I think, a limited amount that any particular state can do, because this is a national or even a global issue that needs to be tackled. But what do you think of that narrow question of the idea that these social media platforms that in many ways are the lifeblood of campaigns at this point shouldn't be able to casually ban political candidates?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's set aside for a moment that it's been a magnitude more of calm since Donald Trump was deplatformed from Twitter in this country. I think that my learned colleague, Rachel, put so much more thought into her defense of this bill than Ron DeSantis ever did. It is for one reason and one reason only, and that is to pay fealty to Donald Trump. However, I think that there is a significant point there that the Ayatollah still has a platform. I think he should be deplatformed as well. I think we can all agree on that, and it is absurd that he hasn't been. We've got some real significant problems with this type of bill, though. We need to actually figure out a way, if we are going to regulate these tech companies, not to treat them as their government actors, or we need to redefine the law to say that they are. A number of years ago, many human trafficking organizations, anti-human trafficking organizations, state by state, tried to pass laws in order to define Backpage.com, which was essentially profiting off of the sale of minors, right? It was struck down every single time. They then tried to pass a fine for doing it instead of blocking it. They were struck down under the Supremacy Clause, under the Section 202 of the Communications Decency Act, every single time. So will this be. This is not a bill, state by state, legally, that is going to pass the test. I think if we really want regulation of how these tech companies, and far be it from me to defend them, I think that they have been bad actors pretty much over the last 7 or 8 years in terms of politics. We need to figure out a way to federally regulate them and define what type of actors they are. Right now, they are still a private company. I think it is hilarious that Republicans are taking the charge to regulate private companies and pretending that they're government actors right now. That has not been the MO of conservatives over the last several decades. But if we are going to pretend that they're government actors, then we have to regulate them that way. Right now, they're not, and they are making individual decisions that states have no control over legally.
Yeah, and so, Rachel, what do you make of that? There's a lot of discussion, actually. In the context, Jen, you're very correct about FOSTA and SESTA, two of those big acts that did end up regulating the internet. They were actually, in some ways, blueprints for how this might work in the future. What do you think, Rachel?
So I don't discount state action. I think sometimes the point isn't success. The point is to push the federal regulators, to push the federal legislatures in this direction. That's exactly what happened with FOSTA SESTA. To Jen's point, every single state statute was struck down, so the federal government was pushed into actually passing those bills. The same thing happened with why the Department of Justice is suing Google. The Department of Justice didn't start that suit. 48 attorneys general did. And so I think when you see a groundswell of support for something from the states, that very often, they're sort of the tail that wags the dog in many cases. So I do think you're going to start to see other governors, copy what DeSantis is doing, change it a little bit to meet their state. But again, success isn't necessarily the goal. Pushing federal legislatures in that direction, I think, is necessarily. Yeah. So I do think also, it is, to Jen's point, the realignment is a little bit funny here because you do have conservatives pushing towards sort of regulating these companies and now Democrats defending them as private industry. So it's the realignment has moved very quickly.
Yes. I do want to offer a little bit of a counter narrative to that because the Disney carve out does raise questions about just how willing Republicans actually are to question corporate power here. And because it's hilarious to read the exemption that they added in. It says, this does not include any information service system, internet search engine, or access software provider operated by a company that owns and operates a theme park or other large entertainment complex. Wonder who they could be talking about there, guys. So, Jen, this is what we always see with Republicans, is they're perfectly willing to call out the censorship of Donald Trump or the censorship of the right. Silent on anti-BDS laws, silent or pushing anti-protest laws, and when push comes to shove, very unwilling to actually challenge corporate power.
Right. And I also take a little bit of an issue with the fact that this conversation and narrative has been pushed by the right. Senator Sanders and Senator Warren have been going after big tech for years. This is something that kind of started with them and with their campaigns and their conversation. Only when it affected, number one dear leader in the Republican Party did the Republicans pay any attention to this issue.
Yeah, the problem here is that the wires get scrambled. Whenever Democrats talk about going after big tech, it's because they generally want them to censor more, and the Republicans want them to censor less, which is part of the reason this is generally irreconcilable. But very thoughtful discussion. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Great to see you, ladies.
Next on Rising, D.C. Bureau Chief at The Intercept, Ryan Grimm. He's talking about Jeff Bezos and the government bailout. That's next.